Welcome to the Real Estate Secrets Podcast for healthcare professionals, hosted by Austin Hare and Nathan Palmer, who together have over 2 decades of real estate knowledge and investing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets. Today we have Dr. Gina Dorfman, and she is the owner of Dentistry for Kids and Adults out in Los Angeles, California. The founder of Yapi Software, started in 2010, and now they have over 3,000 practices using it, and a podcast host of Behind the Smiles with Dr. Gina Dorfman. And so I'm really excited for our show today. So Dr. Gina, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are coming from opposite ends of the country. I'm over here in Florida and you're in California. So I'd imagine though our weather is probably pretty similar. You guys stay nice and warm?
It is nice and warm today and very sunny. Great weather.
Yeah, it's been unusually cold in Orlando, but for us, cold is like 60 degrees. So nothing to complain about.
I think the rest of the world is telling you to quit complaining, right?
Yeah, well, especially where you're from, right? So you were born in Russia, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so that's crazy. You are the first Russian-born guest that we've had on the podcast. So congratulations on that.
Yay!
So tell us a little bit about that. How long did you live in Russia for before you guys migrated over to the US?
My family immigrated when I was 16. It was still Soviet Union at the time. It was right before the Berlin Wall had collapsed. And it was an interesting transition. It's a very, polar opposite environment that I came from. Sometimes even just, I remember first time we immigrated through Austria and then Italy. We lived in Italy for a little while waiting for our paperwork to be approved by the American embassy. It was an interesting time, but I remember the very first moment going into a grocery store in a small town in Austria called Altenburg. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it correctly now, but I went in and I was just paralyzed with all the kinds of potato chips that they had there, the variety. And like, I remember in Russia where my mom would get in line in a store, and they didn't even know what they were selling, but there was a line, you got in line because they'd have something that is probably valuable worth standing in line for. I mean, that's just such a big difference.
That's crazy. So yeah, 16 years. So did you speak English before you moved over?
I did not.
Wow. So did you speak any other languages besides Russian?
I've attempted French in school, but whatever language you learn in school, you don't really speak it. You just know a couple of words here and there, right?
Yeah. So you guys came over before the Berlin Wall came down. How much of a time gap was there between when you left and when it came down?
We came here in '89, and I think Berlin Wall is 1992. So a couple of years.
If you had known that it was going to come down, do you think you guys would have stayed? Like, do you think, if they were going to kind of end, like if the socialism in the USSR was going to collapse, if you had known that, you think you would have stayed, or are you happy you guys got out when you did?
No, we would not have stayed. I went to Russia when was it? A couple of years ago. And my husband wanted to go to a concert. The artist, he loves the artist, but he's not able to travel to the United States. So we came to hear him, and I really didn't want to go. My husband insisted. So I said, okay, you know what? We'll go to Paris for a week, and then we'll swing by Russia for a concert for a couple of days, and then we'll go back. And I remember being on the airplane, Air France, and I was just so nervous. I saw all the Russian people around me and I was just so nervous. And I had this unreasonable fear that I won't be able to get out if I go back.
Oh.
And this is like 3 years ago, right? So
Wow.
this is a little different. So I guess it was palpable because the flight attendant kept coming up to me. He was bringing me champagne and really taking care of me. And then at some point he said, "You're not really Russian, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm American, but how could you tell?" He goes, "You're the only one on the plane who's smiling." Which is like, that's just the country, and the people are nice. It's just, you grow up in that environment and you can take someone out of the environment, but the environment still doesn't change, right? And it's still like when I went back, we lived in Moscow in a Four Seasons hotel on Red Square for a couple of days that we were there. And it was, it was beautiful. It was great. I had amazing service. The food was amazing. Everything was, the stores, honestly, I went to, they have a couple of stores there that are famous. One is called Goom. The other one, I think, is called Zoom or something like that. We went in, and I have never seen the kind of abundance that you see like in the center of Moscow. The designers I've never heard of. I mean, Neiman Marcus just looks like, dress for less compared to the luxury that I've seen in the center of Moscow. But once you
Wow.
go a little bit outside, all of a sudden it's the same old Russia. Nothing has changed,
Hmm.
and they
So
had the same president ever since. I mean, you know,
Putin has been
yeah.
president since 92.
I believe so. I might be wrong. It might be like a few years later. But yeah, I think it was a little, I think Yeltsin was there before, but
Hmm.
nothing really changed.
So I'm curious, like, what would you consider it, communist or socialist?
Communist is an idea. Socialism is really, Russia is a socialist country. It's not a communist country. Communism is a utopian idea that looks really nice on paper. When Karl Marx wrote the manifesto, it was about the power to the people. Everyone gets everything. But we all know it doesn't work this way. And so, the reality is what you have socialism when government controls everything, and people don't really have anything.
Okay, because socialism is kind of like an idea as well, right? I mean, I know that with communism, the idea is that there is no ownership of land or assets or means of production. It's all owned theoretically between the people, and it's evenly dispersed. With socialism, like, I guess I don't understand that when you say that communism is an idea, but socialism is like an economic, or socialism is how it works out in practicality. Socialism, it seems like the government owns those things like more directly and then disperses the resources. Like, how would you, I guess, like, I hear both of them talk about a lot, but I just don't have a clear understanding of the difference, really.
Yeah. So I think the main confusion is that when people in America talk about socialism, I think they're thinking Sweden. And Sweden is a capitalist country. We shouldn't make that confusion. I mean, they have great welfare programs, higher taxes, free education, free medicine. That's not socialism. They do have private options. And in fact, Sweden is going away from a public education system because they found that the private education is actually better.
Wow.
So that's not socialism. Socialism is what you have in Russia, what you had in other Eastern European countries around Russia. Um, you can have some private property, like you could buy a condo, so that's not completely. Communism is like a commune, like that's, you could probably see it in some cults, but it's not really a realistic idea to implement. But what you have is socialism. China, again, it's, everyone refers to it as a communist country, but to me it's more like a socialist country because you do have some private ownership in China. um, the reality is that you can call it whatever you want, but we all know what it looks like when you see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of, it seems like the difference would be communism. There's like zero ownership about anything, and with socialism, people are allowed to own some things, but the government essentially takes most of the resources from those private means of production or whatever and redistributes them. Is that correct? How much
Yes.
are you allowed to own in Russia?
Um, well, you could own a car. You own your car. You own your you can own your apartment. Not everyone owns an apartment, but you could. But to buy a car, there's a wait list. Cars are not readily available. You're waitlisted,
Wow.
and then it's a merit system. So and the merit system, it doesn't work because the people who might be eligible to get a car, they're not eligible because they're good drivers. Like that would be the merit system for getting a car. No, the merit system is you can buy a car if you have certain accolades, you're a member of the Communist Party, but these people
Wow.
are not necessarily driving. So what would happen is they would buy a car and then resell it on a black market for a mark, price. And that's, again, that's just how things work in Russia. You don't do anything straightforward. You always pay someone under the table to get things done. You go to a hospital, there are no medical supplies. If you want medical supplies, you got to grease some palms. I mean, that's, because there's a shortage of everything, because in that kind of system, people are not motivated to produce. Why would anyone produce? You have your free healthcare, you have your free education, you have your free everything, and you don't have to work for it. So why, everyone is getting paid the same regardless of whether they're being productive or not.
So, and I know right now there's a movement towards socialism, which is very surprising to me. And I think the thought is that I think it's more of a blended thing, which we do kind of have a blended economy now, because some things we do are provided, like, police and roads and infrastructure and that sort of thing. But I think that a lot of young people want socialism because to them it just sounds like, okay, free healthcare, free, maybe like a basic income, and a free place to live. In Russia, like, what was provided? Was like, if you didn't own your own condo, was your house, was your living, was that provided for you? Did you have a free place to live? Did you have free food? Like, what was on the table as, like, you didn't have to work for these things?
Well, not working was actually illegal.
Okay.
You weren't allowed to not work. You had to have a job. You didn't have to do anything. Like, you could show up drunk and just hang out, but you had to have a job. Drinking on the job, like day drinking, Russians, Soviets invented day drinking. That didn't start with COVID. So yeah, again, nothing was required. You didn't have to really, you just had to make an appearance of work. And I don't want to say it's across all fields. Obviously, when my family, both of my grandfathers were in academia. My dad was a physicist he had a PhD in math. So like these kinds of people, like these people are self-motivated. They work. They're not. But we're talking about, but these people can do well in any economy, in any, we're talking about the people that don't want to do anything, or maybe they would if they were motivated to do it.
They had an incentive.
They had an incentive, and these people had no incentive. So they just did the minimal required, or they did, like, for example, in a grocery store, the reason why there was a food shortage in the store is because most of it was stolen before it even got on, because everyone knew a guy who could get something for extra money, and that's how people made money. So people, being a grocery store manager was actually a very
Profitable,
prestigious and profitable job, because you would just steal and resell the food at higher prices, and people were buying it. Like, that's reality. And interesting, that's the problem with foreign aid, and I think a lot of people here don't realize it, is that most of the aid never hits the people who need the aid. It all goes to the people who are on a upper echelons of the government, and it all gets appropriated before it gets to the intended recipients. And I've seen it happen in Russia so many times.
Yeah, so like you had to show up, right? Like, you technically, on paper, you had to work. Let's say you're working, right? So when you're working, do you get to participate in the goods, like the benefits, right? Like, what are those benefits that you got as a result of showing up and going to your job? Like, I'm guessing there wasn't any sort of paycheck, right? There wasn't any sort of hierarchy. Like, your parents, as a mathematic physician or physicist, he's getting the same as somebody who is like hauling potatoes or something.
No, there was a hierarchy, but the hierarchy was very small. So for example, if you're a physician, you would be getting, let's say in dollars, let's say $3,000 a month. If you were an electrician, you would be getting $1,500 a month. If you were a filing clerk, you would be getting $1,000. So yeah, there is a difference, but the difference is not proportionate, considering the effort that it takes to, and the education and the.
So you still had to pay for your own food and your own housing and your own car. You just, like, it just sounds like you make a lot less money. So what was the trade-off? Like, what were you supposedly getting in exchange for not being able to have more income. Like essentially your income is capped at a certain level. There is no more upside after a certain level. So what was that trade-off? Like, okay, I'll give up, like theoretically, you're supposed to give up this much upside in exchange for sustenance from the state, right? Like,
Well, see, here's the thing. There's no choice. You don't have a choice.
right.
And you have to remember how we arrived at that. Anyone who had anything, the communists went in and appropriated everything, and they killed, like they would go in, they killed the czar, they killed the kids. It's the most evil regime that has ever existed, because you just kill people, take away their money. And like in civilized countries, they call it the robbery. Here we call it, socialism. Here is like it's power to the people. The people get to run into houses, take whatever they want, and kill the owners. And that's how we build socialism or communism.
Right. No, yeah.
Because their people are bad. People who have money, they're evil. So you take away the money, you kill them, and you give the money to the people, because people deserve that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is very obviously oxymoronic to say that people are evil, so we'll kill them.
Right. And you know what? And here's the thing. If you look at any regime, you look at the Nazis, you look at the, King Leopold, who's supposedly like the deadliest king, the Great China. There's no regime that, or what's the Mongol guy? What's his name?
Oh, Genghis Khan?
Yeah, like he's like the most evil person, right?
Yeah.
Like the Ivan the Terrible. Nobody killed more people than communists did.
Wow.
Between Russia and China and all of the other communist country, they're completely intolerant to any kind of diversity. It's just the regime is terrible, but we just don't understand. People don't understand the difference, and I think that's why they like the ideas. The ideas are nice, but the problem is that they're not practical. They're not attainable by normal means, and so that's the trade-off.
Right. Right.
But
like,
in a communist, so you're kind of asking me like, what do you get? So everyone has a set. It's like, it's kind of like everywhere else. So you have your salary. You have you if you can buy a car, you have to pay for it. If you don't have a car, you use public transport, you pay for your transportation. You pay, if you have a taxi, you pay for your taxi. If if you travel, you pay for your, so nothing is free. Like you don't go anywhere and like get something for free. And that's socialism, because communism is this communal idea that everything is owned by everybody. So that's the difference, right? You pay for your food. There are restaurants. If you want to eat in a restaurant, you go to a restaurant. But the problem is that for most people, it's just not, like most people would not be able to afford to eat in a restaurant.
Well, at some point, the people wanted this, right? Because I think the Bolsheviks took power. What was it called? Like Blood Monday or Red Monday? Violently. They kind of used propaganda to discredit the current leaders, and then they took over. But like they had to have enough support. You know what I mean? Like there was enough people behind them to support them, so they believed in their ideologies. Like so. What was the benefit that they were, because nobody's going to go say, hey, listen, yeah, I want to have my salary capped. Like, let's go fight a revolution for this, right? Like they wanted this shared like resources, I'm guessing. So like, what was like the benefits of these people that caused these people to get up behind this revolution? And like, I know it was idealistically, it didn't pan out in reality, but idealistically, what was it that they were hoping for when they had this revolution?
So first of all, you have to remember that when you read the manifesto, it doesn't sound like an evil, document. It's very nicely written. It's power to the people. People deserve this. It's not fair that a few wealthy people own everything and you guys have nothing. This is not fair. You need to you produce everything they own is produced by your hands. So you have to own this. Again, ideas are great, right? And of course, you have to remember that Russia at the time was very, it wasn't a progressive country. It was a feudal country. There's not a lot of industry. There were some, but not enough. The conditions were very poor in which the workers worked. change was needed. That there's no question about it. And you also, and it was also, Russia was always very imperialistic country. And so, for example, Jews weren't allowed to live in the center of the city.
Wow.
In like Moscow, St. Petersburg, Jews weren't allowed, so they were all on the outskirts, in like little, I forget what they're called now, like villages.
Okay.
And Jews, I just know Jews because I'm Jewish, but like I don't know, so you have to remember that the first revolution, which was actually a flop, was mainly carried by the intelligence, the intelligence community, the universities, the students.
Academia.
They had great ideas of how life will be pure when we have communism, right? So that was, but that didn't pan out, and it was actually led by Vladimir Lenin's younger brother, but it didn't work out. I mean, they were defeated immediately because they were academia. So guess what they did? They figured out that in order to get the people to uprise, they have to take control of the media, which at that point wasn't Twitter. At that point, it was
The newspaper.
a newspaper. So they took control of newspapers. They took control. They started to distribute propaganda. They started to go out to factories and get the workers and the sailors and like in villages, the farm workers. They got them riled up, and that's when it took control. But they literally did it utilizing media.
So
they got people to believe.
Using this media, what were they promised? Like, how did they get them riled up? They said, "Hey, it's injustice. You deserve more. You should have a piece of the pie." Like, what were they saying in this media to get them to be on their side?
Well, that's exactly what they said. Just what you did. You shouldn't be working in those inhumane conditions, which is absolutely true. I mean, there's no denying that. But what happened afterwards is, you can't build something utilizing without money. So you need money, you need people to work, and it was complete disaster. Now, also, Jews were actually a big part of that movement because they were systematically prosecuted under the Tsar, so they were on board. And then when Stalin came to rule, he pretty much, I think he killed like 60 million Jews. Which is, again, this is just how,
So I have a question. The people, in academia who really propelled communism forward, were they like dictators at the time who were like trying to, deceive people into being subversive to them because they knew that they would have all the wealth and the power, or did it result in, were they altruistic in their thoughts and it resulted in sort of a dictatorship leadership because they had to be the facilitators of essentially aggregating all of the resources and then being in control of who they would distribute them to?
Absolutely. They were idealistic in their view. They really saw unicorns. They truly believed that a better world is coming. But again, this is, communism doesn't work. It's just not, it may work on a small scale in a commune somewhere. But even in those stories, like, remember what happened with, what's his name? The Kool-Aid guy.
Yeah, the cult, it was a cult and then they all killed themselves.
Yeah, like it's,
It didn't really work out that well for anybody.
Yeah. So again, it may work, like you have some semblance of communism in Mormon communities, but again, this is, there are cases where it's not working out really well, right? So I should say certain Mormon communities. So the point is that it doesn't work. You need infrastructure. You need to build infrastructure. People need to be motivated to build things, and they didn't. And so once they ran out of money, that's when the dictatorship started, because how do you make people do things?
So the argument that I hear for communism now is that the reason it's only really gotten one good try historically, and this is coming from like academics that I talked to today, are saying these types of things, which is coming down from the top academic level, right? Like the high, elite academia. And they're saying that the reason communism has failed is because it's only ever gotten really one attempt, and that was under a dictator. And it seems like what you're saying is that it wasn't really tried under a dictator, is that communism forms dictators. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I said. And you have to remember the problem with high academia is that, you know, the expression, those who can do and those who can teach,
Yeah.
right? So they're all about ideas. And
Those who
ideas
can't do
are
teach.
great. Yeah. So that, you know, that's exactly the problem. They couldn't build anything. And they have ideas, but they're not builders. In dentistry, the same thing. The best dentists are not the ones teaching in universities. You know, if they're such good dentists, they're not teaching, they're practicing. Maybe they'll teach like in certain like Coys and Spear and like those kinds of private centers, but they're not getting like a teacher's job at a dental school. So that's exactly the problem with academia. They understand the philosophy behind it, but they don't understand how to make it work. And it hasn't really been tried once. I mean, it's been tried in multiple countries. Just because it happened in the same century doesn't mean that, you know, they tried. I mean, look how many countries they tried. They tried it on a small scale. They tried in a most populated republic in the world. It just doesn't. They tried it in a mixed environment. They tried it in a monogenous environment. It doesn't work. It does
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's crazy. I think you're absolutely right. The people from academia, is very like non-pragmatic. You know, there's a lot of ideologies, but nobody, I mean, man, I went from being in college, being very idealistic, a lot of things like this, things that they were telling me like made a lot of sense. And immediately after college, I started a business, you know, and it required capital that I had been saving up, and I had to hire people. And like, man, talk about two different dichotomies, right? Like all these things in theory, when you came out in practicality, just did not work. And so I think there's so much more credit for owning a business, right, than just teaching in classroom all day. And my hat's off to the people who own a business and then go back into being a professor, because that's great. Because I mean, in academia, it's just so we're so far away from capitalism, the free market, and there's so far left, right? And like, I'm not saying both extremes are bad. Far right and far left are both bad, right?
Agreed.
But academia is just moving so far left. So they'll have like bigger governments and have them take control of everything. And it's just crazy because, I mean, two things. Number one, like we talked about earlier, you know, you need incentive, right? And so like when you don't have any incentive to do anything, it's just going to result in no production. And then there is no base putting it forward. And then secondly, there's always like, it's not that communism started by dictators is bad. It's that communism creates dictators. So
Exactly.
it creates dictators, and there is no way around that, because you giving absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's one of the problems people have with capitalism is like, well, nobody should have this much money. They have all this money and have all this power, and that is causing them to be corrupt. Well, guess what? When you're stripping those resources away and allocating it to a certain few, you're giving them absolute power, right? And so like, what makes the people at the top and I'm not saying like unbridled capitalism with monopolies, all that stuff is corrupt too. Like, I'm not saying that. I do believe we need some regulation to keep monopolies from like taking advantage of everything. But like, why do you think that the people who are at the top of capitalism are so evil, and the people who rise to the top of communism or socialism, even, let's just say, so like they rise to the top of socialism, they're in charge of the government, and they got voted in and have all this power. Why are they so different? What's intrinsically different about these people?
That's exactly it. You know, you mentioned Putin earlier. Not only he's one of the wealthiest people in the world, no one even knows how much money he
know.
has. And he's also, he's like, ultimately, he decided that he cannot be reelected. That's it. Like, that's, you know, and that's exactly, you made a great point. You can take the money away from Musk and all of a sudden I'm blanking on all of the millionaires' names. What's his name?
Musk, Gates, Bezos.
Yeah, you can Bezos, but you can take their money away and give it to the government, and then the government becomes an evil power that has ultimate access to everything. And the argument that communism was only tried once, again, you know, if you try again and it doesn't work, maybe it's not for you. Like that, you know, that try again thing doesn't work. Like trying the same thing and expecting a different result is definition of insanity. So we tried it in this country, in that country, in multiple different environments. It hasn't worked. So maybe we should stop trying and try something different. And it's not only that communism doesn't give incentive, it actually disincentivizes people. That's the bigger problem, because there's some people that will waste their lives away anyway. There's some people that don't want to work in any economy. That doesn't matter. But in this economy, you have this part of the population that are not really using the resources that are available to them. But then you have people who are motivated. They wake up in the morning and they can't wait to get on with their day, and they get things done, and they want to do it for themselves, not only just for money. For a lot of people, it's just the accomplishment. Now, imagine these people in an environment where you're not only able to grow personally, you're not able to get anything done, you're not able to make more money doing things right. Like, what's the point to even try? You have to be really special, motivated person. And that, when you look at Russia, there are a lot of amazing athletes and academics and writers. Like, these people are just so super motivated that even communism couldn't stifle them. But for the rest, for the middle class, it's just, there's no middle class in Russia, because they just they kill any desire to do anything productive, at
Hmm.
least by legal means.
I think one of the things that is really appealing to people these days is healthcare, right? And just the astronomical cost of healthcare, because healthcare is a massive failure in our country. But to say that socialism is the answer, I think, is also a fallacy too. I mean, we have, and it's just so easy to get those mixed up, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, we have a technically capitalist society, and healthcare is bad in our society. Therefore, we have to blame the system on one of like anything that's wrong. And that, they're independent. I mean, socialism theoretically would give you free healthcare, but would that really solve the problem? Because then you're creating other holes, right, in this thing. And so, there's so many different ways that you could approach it while maintaining a free market, right? Like, having transparent pricing would be a huge one. I mean, because dentistry largely doesn't even like, it's much more affordable. It's not really involved in all the different hands, like, of insurances and the intermediaries that get involved between hospitals and insurance companies and people, right? Like, it's so clouded and it's so muddied. And so, I mean, I understand the sentiment, but I just think if you really follow this, let's follow that thought process down all the way through. At some point, you're going to fall, you're going to expose these gaping holes in this ideology. But nobody talks about that, because, if you disagree with me, like, you hate me, right? And like, there's no disagreement with love. It's all disagreement with hate. And so we have these chasms that are like getting divided more and more. But the reason it's so passionate to me is obviously, like, I'm into real estate, right? Like, I'm obviously a capitalist because we require capital to get things done. But it's not like, to me, it's not a certain way that has been artificially altered to create something. It's the default, right? Like, the free market system, capitalism, is like the default. And yeah, sure, sometimes you get more benefits because you were born with better parents than other people were, and that sucks for people that were born without that, right? But we also we do things to help them, and it's like, I would never sit here and say, hey, we got the perfect system, we got it all figured out. Like, no, we got a lot of problems. But the answer isn't to just rip off the whole system and build fresh. I mean, they tried that with communist revolution. They tried that with what's his name, or Mao Zedong and the Great Leap Forward, who killed somewhere between 40 and 60 million people when they attempted socialism and communism. And it's like, you get focused on this utopia and this perfection, and then that creates, so much more chaos. So let's fix what we have. Let's make what we have better. We don't have to rip it up. I mean, with real estate, like, it's hard, to create capital, to find locations. I mean, we risk a lot every single time we do a transaction for somebody else. And it doesn't always work out. The rewards have to be really, like, to go buy a building, to go put this type of risk up, the reward has to be really, really high for you to be able to take that risk. Because if the reward's not good, you're just not going to take the risk. Why would I take the risk? Why would I work hard when I have negative money? I could just sit home and do nothing and be positive. So I think you need really, really good incentives, right? Like, you need really, really good incentives to incentivize people to take risk, to have innovation, to continue to grow. So, and then I know you guys, speaking of innovation, you have an entire tech company that's been growing. So, yeah. Anyways, I want to, like, we're kind of going, like, from one end of the extreme to the other, but we're very much in agreement. I think it's really important to have you on the show, just because where we are in 2021 and what the thoughts people are having. I don't want this to get political, but we got to talk about this, because it's dangerous, like, the direction that we're on. And so, yeah, I just really want to address that from somebody who came from Russia. You saw it firsthand. You saw what it was like, and these ideas that people are touting, they're all theory, right? Like a lot of these guys are very far left. It just doesn't work. And so I think we need to like work on what we have rather than uproot it by the system. So thank
Completely
you.
agreed.
Thank you for taking time to do that. Let's talk about your software company. Let's talk about your practice. So you guys, you opened up in 2003, right?
2002.
2002. Okay. Now, what were you looking for? Like, how important was site selection for you during that process? Did you know, like, what did you know to look for at the time?
So it's a great question. I wanted to open from scratch. I probably could have looked for an existing practice and probably would have found something, but I had a very specific idea of how I wanted my practice to be. And I felt like it would be easier to just start it from scratch. But the problem is that my practice is in Southern California, where it's very saturated market and it's very hard to grow a practice from scratch. So even back then, I think it might be even worse now.
What was your
Um,
patient to office ratio? Like, was it 1,000 to one office? Was it more? Was it less? Do you know what it was at the time?
so where I ended up was 1 to like 2,500, which is actually pretty
Nice.
good,
That's good.
especially, yeah. But I ended up going like outside of the area where I really wanted to practice. Like ideally, it would have been nice to practice where I live and be close to my office, but there the odds were like crazy. It would have been like 1 to 1,000, which is impossible to do from scratch. It's not even enough patients to run an existing practice. You really have to be doing something special. And I was 2 years out of dental school, so the idea that I could be doing something special more than just the way that I ran the practice. As a dentist, I wasn't mature enough to be that the go-to person in dentistry. So we wanted to. There are a couple of how, well, obviously you're in real estate, so location, right? So location was going to be my marketing for me. I could have spent 100,000 on marketing, and I could have been a miss. That's one of the biggest issues. It could have been a miss. And actually, I have attempted a little bit of marketing, and it didn't work as well. But my location paid off. We had a visible location that was both on a major road where we had a big sign. And then it was in a plaza. So the plaza also had a sign. And it was a busy plaza with like Wendy's and a gym. So people were constantly walking by. We had a banner, dental office coming soon. And people would just peek in and like, oh, what are you building here? And a lot of our patients initially came from that. And we still get tons of walk-ins. Even like, 18 years later, we have people coming in because they know there's a dental office. And a lot of times, even if they see an ad somewhere, I don't really market now, but maybe like even 5 years ago, they would see some sort of an ad and they would be like, oh, that's that dentist next to Wendy's, we should check them out. So, that visibility is really important. And I know a lot of my colleagues do billboards and radio ads and all of that. I probably, I occasionally I've done some mailers and things like that, but for the most part, it's just my website and my location that matters. So it was very important. And another thing is I like doing pediatric dentistry, and my idea was that my office will be an office for everyone, kids and adults. So I had to find a community where there were a lot of children. And that's how we ended up there. We looked for family community with kids. We looked for a location where there wasn't a lot of competition, and I got very lucky because we were profitable like month 2 since we opened the practice.
Yeah, that's really fast. And so how long were you guys there for before you opened up your second location?
The second location was now in 2006. So it was like 4 years. And second location was almost an accident. Now, here's the thing. I always wanted to have several locations. In fact, before starting the software company, I had a lease ready to go in a third location. But the interesting thing with second location, my practice is called Dentistry for Kids and Adults. And one day my biller comes in and she goes, "Did you open a second location?" And I said, "No, I like you would know."
Hmm.
Why? And she goes, "Well, there's an office called Valencia Dentistry for Kids and Adults." I said, "No, that
Oh,
doesn't make like that's a little too like that's literally like 5 miles away from me.
and it's
That
your
doesn't
name.
make sense." Yeah, so I was gonna call and and raise hell, but then I looked up and it's children and adults, not kids and adults, and then I got lazy and I'm like, okay, whatever,
Okay.
let it be. So about like maybe 9 months later, we went for lunch to get some In and Out, which is like that's what we're known for in California.
Yep, I'm
Uh,
very familiar.
yeah, and so we were getting some In and Out, and we wanted to get Starbucks coffee, and there was a plaza in Valencia where they both have those two storefronts. So we went there, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, there's the sign that Tamara was referring to. So we come and check it out, and there's a police sign in the door. Unfortunately, somehow the lady who purchased the practice or started the practice, it was a startup, didn't make it work, and the place was police, and we had to jump on it. I was like, the sign is already up. The name is similar enough. We'll just take it. So we ended up going for In and Out and coffee, and we came back with an office.
Wow.
It was all equipped already. I have a feeling I understand why she didn't make it work. It was a great location. It was facing the nursery at Lowe's, which is frequented by women. Women make majority of dental appointments. It's right next to a nail salon, and on the other side was an ATM, local bank, like also double sign, visible road. It was a no-brainer. My understanding is that she didn't have anyone covering the front office. I guess she was trying to save some money. And so she was only there maybe a day or two, and the rest of the time, and she missed out on that walk-in traffic. So
Wow.
if I would give any advice to your listeners, if you're doing a startup in a visible area, make sure that the phone is always answered and there's always someone there, because you do get a lot. If you get a great visible location, you get a lot of walk-ins.
Wow. So did you have to do any sort of due diligence on this site? Like, did you check any demographic data, like before you went through with it?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where you want to work with someone who specializes in dental lease with the broker, because they knew what kind of information I needed. And he didn't find it for me. We were just driving around the area the first time around. Well, the second time, obviously, but the first time around, we didn't um
You didn't
have
know.
him find the space. We were just driving around to see like what's going on in the area, and then we saw something that we got interested, and then we gave him the information, and he did all of the
Is this
due
the first or
diligence.
the second location?
The second. I'm
Okay.
sorry, the
The
first, I
first.
meant the
Okay.
first. The second, I already knew the area
Yeah.
really well. I knew I could make it work. It was like that decision was made like at lunch. You
So
know?
he was an expert, like he had done multiple deals for dentists, like he was an expert in
Yeah.
specifically in dentistry. Yeah. See, that's so important. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we talk to people who it's like, oh yeah, I have a broker, it's my brother-in-law, or it's my golfing buddy, or it's my cousin, it's something, right? And it's like, well, okay, that's great. Like I understand that you want to help them, but how many deals had they done in your industry? I mean, we're talking any industry, right? You think that if they're local and if they're a broker, like a commercial real estate broker, that they automatically are going to help you find the best location. And that's just not true. We coach people to go, don't use someone unless they've done at least 10 deals, like in your specific industry, because there's a lot of learning involved every time. And that kind of sucks that the person is going to have to go figure out someone else to have 10 deals. But I mean, you can't put that on you, because especially in dentistry, it's so expensive to build out. I mean, you're looking at $175 to $200 a square foot. Like it is one of the
Yeah.
most, if not the most expensive build outs of any industry. And so you can't afford to make any mistakes. And a lot of times, even with local brokers, you might get a sense of location bias, which kind of leads to laziness. And a lot of times brokers, they're just lazy, and it takes a lot of work. It takes really hard work, because you might think, if you're local, you think to yourself, oh yeah, like I already know that area. I grew up here. Yeah, you do want to be here. You don't want to be there. But meanwhile, you haven't driven it in a while. It could have changed a lot, especially now we've seen post-COVID, things change really fast, right? Businesses go out all the time. New locations open up. So being humble enough and dedicated enough to actually physically drive the locations. And then you got to do the extra workload of vetting the buildings too, because it might not, you might see something on CoStar or LoopNet, which are the websites that doesn't have all the information, where if you're driving by, hey, this is something that wasn't listed on there, right? And then you got to cross-reference that with Google Maps, and then you got to cross-reference that with the county appraiser, right? And then you got to call multiple people, and just it takes a lot of work. And it's frustrating to see people like just settle for somebody who's not an expert in the industry, who won't put in the effort, and they wonder why their business is suffering. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's the thing: there are a lot of, at least here in California, there are a lot of regulations. Like they'll tell you, like the broker, when we were looking at some other places before, the broker would be like, you can't do a dental here because there's a requirement of so many parking spaces per square footage for medical specifically, or dental. Like you have to have 4 parking spaces per, I think, 1,000 square feet. Otherwise, you can't open a dental office there unless it's already grandfathered. Like this is the kind of stuff that I would know as a dentist looking for a place, but a broker would tell me right away. Or like, the city requires that the vent goes somewhere, and so you need a specific type of a building to put your office in. And it's just it's much here's the thing: sometimes it's tempting to save money by going with someone who is sort of in that business. Same thing with contracts. Like a lot of us get into contracts and we're like, oh, my buddy's an attorney, I'll just have him read it. Yeah, that's great. But here's the thing: if your buddy misses something because that's not his area of expertise, it's going to cost you so much more money down the road, right? So the same thing here. You got, that's why they have specialization. I wouldn't, for example, I wouldn't want to treat someone for sore throat. I mean, it's in the same vicinity, but that's not what I do, right?
Yeah. 100%. Very, very accurate metaphor, because it's like, yeah, it is technically, it's healthcare, right? But there's so many different disciplines. The same thing with commercial real estate. I mean, you have office, you have retail, which is what we focus on. You have like medical non-retail, which isn't really our wheelhouse. Like we're talking big hospitals, right? You've got self-storage, you've got even multifamily, and you've got warehouse and industrial, like, which is really taking off right now with Amazon. But yeah, just because we know retail really well doesn't mean that we know office, right? Doesn't mean that we know industrial. And so a lot of times people, it's like, oh yeah, commercial real estate broker. But yeah, you really, it's really important to vet the brokers, make sure that they know what they're doing, make sure that they're really going to help you. So, and then the other thing too, yeah, like you talk about saving money, right? That's another example when a lot of times people will look at these locations and they say, yeah, well, this retail location is $10,000 a month. That's crazy. I can go to this office location. I can spend $3,000 a month. Like that's triple, which that's very true. It is 3 times as much. And when you look at only like in a vacuum, okay, just looking at rent, yeah, that's ridiculous. But take a step back, look at your overall expenses. It's only really 10% of your overall, 15% of your overall expenses, right? Even though it's triple your rent. What does that do to your top line revenue? Well, we've seen anywhere from 50 to 100% growth in top line revenue, right? Like that could be $50,000, $100,000 or more a month. Is that worth $6,000, $7,000?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at it in those terms is sometimes you just need someone to coach you through it, right? Because you don't want to be stuck spending all that money on marketing. Like you said, $100,000 that you spend on marketing. If you don't have a good location, people don't see it, you're going to have to spend money on marketing to get people in there. And marketing is oftentimes a lot more expensive.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to tell you, there's more. It's not just even getting new patients. Sometimes like out of sight, out of mind. You have patients that that they know they need a cleaning. It's been a while, but they don't really know how long. Maybe you send them a postcard or email or text message to remind them
It's true.
to schedule their cleaning. So they're reminded at the time and they forget. But imagine someone who's living in a community and every day they drive their kids to school, they drive by and they see a sign. Like how often, sometimes we have people stop by, existing patient, just to pay the bill or just, schedule an appointment. You have to think about all of those terms, and a visible retail location in a good community is make it or break it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The reoccurring visits are so important too. So, okay, well, how did you start Yapi? It's Yapi, right?
Yes.
YAPI. Okay, what led to that? Like, what was the inspiration for that? What problem were you solving?
So I told you that when I wanted to start my practice, I had a very specific idea of what this practice is going to be. I knew I was going to be in a very saturated market, and so I needed to be efficient. I wanted to be paperless, and just for clarity, so the difference between paperless and chartless, which is what most offices are, a chartless office has a digital chart instead of a paper chart, instead of a traditional paper, right? And all of the information is in the digital chart, but someone has to put that information in a digital chart manually. So they'll print out patient form, the patient will fill out the paperwork, then the scheduling coordinator will retype it into the software, then they'll scan the paper, then they'll shred the paper, then they'll print the routing slip that the doctor will fill out, that someone will retype in the computer, then they'll scan and shred that. And then they'll print the report. And this is so, a typical dental practice that's chartless is really a paper processing plant, and all of the scanning and shredding and data entries, right, not really very different from a paper chart. It's still the same amount of time involved. But the kicker is that we invest a lot of money into digital technology, into the digital chart, having computers in the operatory, having digital x-rays. We could be easily spending $100,000 just on all of that technology, and we're still scanning and shredding paper. And a patient is sitting in our reception room looking at their watch, like, am I going to get started while she's retyping the data in the computer, right? And the hygienist shows up, or the dentist is like, is my patient ready yet? No, because they're still processing the data. So in a true paperless office is where the information is entered electronically and retrieved electronically. And the computer knows. So when I was working in a dental practice before my own, we would print out routing slips. A routing slip is like a document that goes throughout the office with the patient, that everyone knows what to do with that. It sort of replaces the paper chart. We would print it out and then take a highlighter and highlight all of the actionable, important information. But computers should be able to provide that to us on an instance. Like, the patient is coming, show me everything that's really important for this appointment. And so that was my idea. And when I invested into this amazing technology, computers everywhere, we were still not paperless. We were chartless. We were processing paper. We were spending a lot of money on ink and toner and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. We actually calculated that a typical practice with one dentist and one hygienist can spend about 1,200 hours a year on making appointments, on reminding patients of their appointments by phone, and scanning and shredding charts. So, which is a lot. Like at $20 an hour, that's a lot of money every year spent on something that a simple software can do. And so I kept talking about this. There were some other things that I didn't like lack of intra-office communication software that was integrated with practice management software. In other words, I was seeing opportunities for improvement, and I was reaching out to the maker of my practice management software regularly, asking them for enhancements. And they're a big company, and the movement is very slow. So one day, when I complained to my dad once again, who's a software engineer. So I once again complained to him about my software. He said, okay, what do you want to do? And so that's kind of when we came up with the idea for this intra-office communication, paperless, full automation software. It was, it started 10 years ago. It was very different from what it is today. We've added a lot of different things over time. But the reality, I scratched my own itch because I wasn't happy with what I was able to get at the time.
So I think software companies are like a little bit deceptive because, you look at the NFL and it's like, yeah, I'd love to be an NFL player, make all that money, but like these are massive humans. Like I physically cannot be them. But you look at a software company or you look at Facebook or anything, it's like, oh, wow, look at that. Like that software company makes a lot of money. Maybe I should just start a software company because they look normal. I don't think we see all that goes into it. So like, did you have any misconceptions going into it? And like, how hard was it to actually get it programmed and get it up off the ground?
So it's actually quite hard. Generally in business, overnight success takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years, right?
Right.
So the easy part is actually writing the software. That's the easy part. Getting people to use your software and gaining trust with them and getting market share. That's the more difficult part. The most difficult part is actually scaling, going from a small operation into a big operation, and making sure that everything transitions. I think any business, like in any business, scaling is the most difficult part. So with software, if someone is going to go out and hire a software engineer to uh, to make software, that's like a recipe for disaster right away, because you can easily spend $1 million on a developer and end up with a non-functional software. So in my case, I was lucky because I had my dad who was already in this business. I was also talking to a friend of mine who's also a software engineer and has actually a company that makes similar software. So you have to have a technical founder. That's my opinion. You can probably,
It's a good idea.
outsource it, but I think you have to have someone um, with a stake in it in order to, with the technical knowledge and some, skin in the game in order to make the product. Otherwise, it's an impossible task. And you have to remember that 10 or 9 out of 10 software startups fail. That's just the reality of it. And a lot of them are actually well funded. It's not the money. We started with $900. Well, we each contribute. My dad contributed $900, and my husband and I contributed $900 towards a startup. And we didn't have to borrow money until we decided to really scale 10 years later. So it was totally bootstrapped. But the key, I guess, for us was that we didn't go out to make money. We made a product for my practices, and like I said, I was going to sign a lease on a third office because that was my goal, to open multi-location dental offices. But because it was something that I designed for me, and because my dad was closely involved, it was just really, I think that was really the key to success. It wasn't a moneymaker. It was a passion project.
Mm. And so then how did you adopt people? How did you get over 3,000 practices on board?
So I'm one of the most prolific posters on Dental Town.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
uh,
Howard
yeah,
Fran. Yep.
Howard Ferran is someone that I consider a great friend and a mentor. And honestly, I have to give him a lot of credit for encouraging me to go with that. Because when we were on the fence, so what happened, I started talking about this on Dental Town, just sharing, when people would say, how do you communicate? Do you have walkie-talkies, or do you just yell down the hallway? And I would say, well, that's exactly the problem. I hated the walkie-talkie so much. We designed software for my own office to solve that problem. Where they would say, oh, what do you do with all the scanning? And I said, yeah, see, that's the problem. We created software to resolve that problem. And so people were like, well, can we use the software? And we gave it to a few friends, and then my dad was doing support for them, and they would send him a bottle of scotch, whenever he helped them out. It
Not
was kind of
vodka? Not vodka?
no, he's more of a scotch drinker. So that's we kind of uh, started that way, and it was never, again, it wasn't intended to be a business, until one Dr. Mike Melkers, posted on Dental Town a thread that was called "Yappy Yippee Me So Happy," and that just kind of snowballed. People started reaching out, where do we sign up? And so that's when we went to Howard Ferran, and we actually flew to Dental Town headquarters, and we sat down with him, and he was so gracious. He had people from the magazine. He had like at least 6 staff members from Today's Dental, his dental practice. They were all in this boardroom. He served sandwiches. We were there for like 4 hours. Of course, Howard did most of the talking. And then he just said, you'd be crazy not to do it. You have to pursue it. And I'm here to help whatever you need.
Did he become a partner with you guys at that stage?
No, he's
No?
just a good friend. He's not involved with the company. And
Oh,
although, there were a couple of times when I called him if I needed a connection or something, and he was always very gracious to, so sort of open his Rolodex for me or give me advice. And Um, you know, he's just such a great business mind, and so sometimes just asking what he thinks is like way more than anyone can hope to get. And so then we actually unveiled Yapi at the Townie meeting at 2011.
Are they
Um,
still doing meetings? Was that like an annual meeting?
it was an annual meeting, but not the last, not last, well, obviously not this year, but not the year before either. So it's been 2 years since the last meeting. Um, I think there's just so many choices now. There's so many different meetings,
Okay.
and you know, that was one of my favorite meetings. My new favorite meeting now is the Voices of Dentistry, which is the meeting. If you haven't been, this is the meeting that you should attend because it's the podcasters meeting.
Oh,
So all of the podcasters are part of the meeting, and they have booth, and some of them end up speaking. There's some CE. But it's attended by the listeners of those podcasts. So it's a really fun meeting. It's just a
where
really
is it
so much.
held?
Last 2 years it was in Scottsdale. The year before that, it was the first meeting was in Nashville. I
Oh, I'm
believe it
definitely
was
gonna
in
look at
Nashville.
that. Do you know when it is for 21?
They haven't set the date yet. Well, 21 was just virtual. They actually ended
Okay.
up doing a virtual meeting, and it's usually at the end of January. So what they did this year is all of the podcasters that um, usually attend VOD, have you heard of the Dental Hacks Nation podcast?
I think I have.
So the Dental Hacks, so VOD is hosted by Dental Hacks, Alan Mead and Jason Lipscomb. It's hosted by Mark Costas with the Dentalpreneur podcast, and it's hosted by
I just
Justin
had Mark on the
Moody.
show.
Yes, great. I love Mark. He's
Okay.
just wealth of information. And it's hosted by Justin Moody, the Dentist Implants and Worms podcast. So the four of them put this together, and so everyone who attended previously, what they did is they recycled old episodes through the Dental Hacks podcast. My episode dropped on January 1st, and they called it the virtual VOD. It was like showcase of all of the different podcasts. And the next one, we're hopeful it's going to be 22, like January. It's like the third weekend of January usually. But it's one of the most fun meetings that you could possibly attend in dentistry.
It does
And
sound fun. I'm gonna look it up. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that does sound really fun. Okay, so anyways, that was kind of like your launch then, is this was Howard Fran, you went through his meeting, and then it just officially came out. And this was what, 2 years ago? Or was it longer?
When we launched it, so we started in 2008, but that's when we were designing for ourselves. And it was 2011 when we first, like May 2011 is when we first showcased Yapi at the Townie meeting.
Wow. Man, that's great. It's been seems like it's been growing very strong for you guys. Is 2021 looking to be as strong as 2020?
It's going to be amazing because last year in August we had an investment from M33 Growth firm, and we've been really able to grow our team. We hired I believe 6 new developers. We hired a couple of QA people, a project manager, new head of technology. We need new architect. We hired a number of different support team members. We hired a VP of sales, VP of finance. So it's really like it went through from like a mom and pop operation early in 2020 to a formal corporation. And we have an amazing roadmap. I'm so excited about our roadmap. We have a lot of new products coming Q1 and Q2, and a lot of things planned for Q3 and Q4. So
Wow.
a marketing team has expanded. So yeah, a lot of great things are coming in 2020.
Well, that's really exciting. So if people want to know more, they think that they could benefit from the software, they have questions for you, what's a good way to get in touch?
So I am always around on Facebook in different dental Facebook groups. You can always find me there. You can always find me on Dental Town. My email is drgina@yapicentral.com. And our website is yapiapp.com.
Cool. Yapiapp.com. I'm just writing that down. Okay, great. Well, I will attach those in the show notes for everybody listening. And yeah, this is really good. So many different places that we went, but yeah, I think it's important to appreciate what we have, right? Like just because, sure, capitalism, free markets, like they're not perfect because people aren't perfect, right? Like we all always make selfish decisions more often than not. And so if you look at the whole, right, if 98% of the net effect is positive, or 75%, let's just say, and 25% is negative, it doesn't mean that you get rid of the entire system because 25 is negative. I mean, capitalism, free markets, they've pulled out like would the average like since capitalism was kind of introduced 200 years ago, I think poverty rate has dramatically dropped. I mean, it's gone from like on average $2 a day per person to like $100 a day, right, or something like that, or $80 a day. Even as recently as 1990, half of the world's population was living under the poverty line of that $2 a day mark, and now today, 2021, it's dropped to 780 million. That's crazy, right? And you might say, oh, well, that's because we've had innovation and that's created these things, and that's true, but it's false to separate that from capitalism, because capitalism and innovation are the same thing. I mean, they go hand in hand, right? You have these incentives to create things and get rewarded with extreme upside reward, right? That helps people take massive risks. So anyways, yeah, I think
And nobody died. That's the important part too. Like you have
right.
to consider that we didn't kill millions of people to make Amazon, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and Amazon, like I'm not a huge fan of Amazon because the practices, but it is what it is. I mean, they're still a net good for society because now single moms who work all the time don't have to go drive, put miles in their car and gas in their tank to get things. It's free for them to pay a small subscription fee every month, and shows up right at their door. It doesn't take any time or money or resources, so it's really helping everybody, and they're getting rewarded for that.
Absolutely. And if it
So
didn't work, it wouldn't have been successful.
yeah, but I mean, we voted for that, and we are voting for it every single day with our dollars, right? Your dollar is your most important vote, and people are voting for that all the time, hand over fist. And we have a say in what those things are every day with whether or not we purchase them. So yeah, I just think it's important for young people these days to think through these things, look through them. We have a generation of people coming up that, and even some older people too, that are really getting tempted with this idealistic society, like this ideology that just in practicality it has never historically worked. So yeah, I think we're at a really important time in our society, and I want to do my part in speaking truth and helping educate people to at least do some education, right? At least do your own education before you vote or before you go decide what you think about it. Like do some research. So yeah, it's great. So I really enjoyed having you on the show. I'd love to keep up with the success of Yapi. We'll have to connect, figure out what events you're going to be at, and maybe have you on a podcast in the future.
Absolutely. I would love to. I had a blast talking to you. And so thank you for having me.
Yeah, you are quite welcome.